Part 1. What was life like for the last person left behind in a plague-stricken village? Hey everyone. Tonight we're drifting back into a quieter corner of history. So dim the lights if you can. Settle into a comfortable position. Maybe pull a blanket a little closer. And as the modern world slowly fades into the background, we're going to wander into a small village many centuries ago. A village that was once full of life. A place where people argued over fences, borrowed tools, and forgot to return them. Complained about the weather, worried about taxes, gossiped about neighbors. A place where church bells rang each morning. A place where children ran through muddy lanes. And then, very slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the village began to empty. Not because of war, not because of famine, but because of disease. Tonight, we're imagining the life of the last person left behind in a plague-stricken village. Not a king, not a knight, not a famous saint, just one ordinary person, the final inhabitant of a place that was once home. And strangely enough, history gives us many examples of villages that came remarkably close to this reality. So close your eyes, and let's begin. The year could be 1349, or 1361, or one of the many plague years that swept repeatedly across Europe. The exact date matters less than the feeling, because for generations after the arrival of the Black Death, plague never truly disappeared. It kept returning, again and again and again. A village might survive one outbreak. Then another would arrive 10 years later. Then another. History can sometimes make these events seem neat and organized. A plague arrives. People die. The plague leaves. Life returns to normal. Reality was much messier. For ordinary villagers, plague became a recurring guest that nobody invited and nobody wanted. Our story begins in a village of perhaps 200 people. A modest place, a few dirt roads, a church, some cottages, fields stretching beyond the houses. Nothing remarkable, which, of course, describes most villages in history. People wake with the sunrise, work in the fields, feed animals, repair fences, bake bread, complain about sore backs, the usual medieval activities. Then one day, someone gets sick. Perhaps a traveler passed through. Perhaps a merchant arrived from another town. Perhaps infected fleas rode quietly into the village on rats. Nobody knows. Nobody can know. Germ theory is still centuries away. At first, the illness seems unfortunate but ordinary. People become sick all the time. Life expectancy is already low. Death is familiar. Then more people become ill. And more. Within weeks, something feels wrong. Very wrong. The village priest notices funerals becoming more frequent. The graveyard begins to fill. Families stop visiting one another. Doors remain shut. The village grows quieter. Fear settles over everything. And fear has a curious way of spreading faster than any disease. People begin inventing explanations. Perhaps God is angry. Perhaps sinners have brought punishment upon everyone. Perhaps witches are responsible. Naturally, medieval people sometimes manage to make terrible situations even worse by searching desperately for someone to blame. Humans remain remarkably consistent in that regard. As deaths increase, daily life begins collapsing. Fields go untended. Livestock wander. Crops rot. Work simply stops. When enough people are sick, ordinary routines become impossible. The blacksmith falls ill. The miller falls ill. The baker falls ill. The people responsible for keeping society functioning suddenly cannot function themselves. The village begins unraveling, one thread at a time. Weeks pass, then months, and eventually our imagined survivor finds themselves in an increasingly strange position. Most people are gone. Some have died. Others fled. Entire households stand empty. Doors hang open. Gardens become overgrown. Animals roam freely through abandoned yards. Silence begins replacing the familiar sounds of village life. Silence is something modern people rarely experience. Even at night, we hear distant traffic, air conditioners, phones vibrating, the low hum of civilization. But medieval silence could be astonishing, especially when an entire community disappears. Imagine walking through streets where every house once contained a family. Now there is nothing, no conversations, no laughter, no barking dogs, only wind, perhaps a loose shutter knocking softly against a wall, perhaps distant birds, nothing else. The survivor wakes each morning to a village that feels increasingly unreal. At first, there may still be responsibilities. Animals need feeding. Water must be carried. Food must be found. Survival leaves little time for reflection. But eventually, the loneliness becomes impossible to ignore. Humans are social creatures. Even people who enjoy solitude generally prefer knowing someone else exists nearby. Our survivor no longer has that comfort. There is nobody left to greet, nobody left to argue with, nobody left to annoy them, which sounds peaceful for approximately 3 minutes. Then it becomes deeply unsettling. Days blur together. Without neighbors or community events, time loses structure. The church bell no longer rings because the bell ringer is gone. Markets no longer happen. Festivals disappear. Even Sundays begin feeling like ordinary days. One of the strangest effects of isolation is how quickly familiar routines vanish. The survivor may begin speaking aloud simply to hear a human voice. People stranded alone throughout history have often done exactly this. Some talked to animals, some talked to themselves, some narrated daily tasks. Anything to interrupt the silence. Imagine entering an abandoned cottage. Food still sits on a table. A shoe remains near a doorway. A blanket lies folded beside a bed. The owners intended to return. They never did. Our survivor encounters reminders everywhere. Every building contains traces of absent lives. A half-finished repair project, a child's toy, a forgotten tool, tiny monuments to interrupted existence. The emotional weight would be enormous. Because plague deaths often happen quickly, life did not gradually fade away. People could appear healthy 1 week and be gone the next. Entire families disappeared almost overnight. Now imagine carrying those memories alone. Every street corner becomes haunted by recollection. Not ghosts. Something quieter. Memory. This was where the baker lived. This was where children played. This was where neighbors gathered during harvest season. Every location becomes a reminder of absence. As months pass, practical challenges emerge. Food becomes increasingly difficult to manage. One person cannot maintain an entire village's agricultural system. Fields shrink. Harvests decline. Tools break. Buildings decay. The village slowly begins returning to nature. Grass pushes through pathways. Birds nest in roofs. Foxes explore empty houses. Nature rarely wastes opportunities. Given enough time, it reclaims almost everything. Our survivor witnesses this process firsthand. And perhaps that is one of the loneliest experiences imaginable. Watching a world disappear while remaining alive to remember it. History records several real villages devastated by plague. One of the most famous examples is the village of Eyam in England. In 1665, plague arrived there through infected cloth sent from London. The villagers made a remarkable decision. Rather than fleeing and potentially spreading disease, they isolated themselves. Many died, but their sacrifice likely prevented further outbreaks in neighboring communities. Today, Eyam is remembered as a place of extraordinary courage. Yet when we think about such villages, we rarely pause to consider daily life for the survivors. What was breakfast like after losing friends and family? What did evenings feel like? How did ordinary conversations continue when nobody remained to converse with? These quieter questions are often harder to answer, but they matter because history is ultimately made of individual experiences, not just statistics, not just dates. People, always people. As winter approaches, our survivor faces another challenge. Darkness. Medieval nights were already dark. Without electric lights, villages depended upon candles, hearth fires, and moonlight. An abandoned village would feel especially eerie after sunset. Windows remain dark. No household fires flicker in the distance. No voices drift through the night air. The survivor sits beside a small fire, perhaps listening to wind moving through empty buildings, perhaps wondering whether anyone will ever return, perhaps remembering names, one after another. The human mind naturally revisits memories during isolation. Old conversations return, embarrassing moments resurface, lost loved ones seem suddenly present. Memory becomes both companion and burden. And so the seasons continue turning. Winter gives way to spring, spring to summer. The village changes. Nature advances. The survivor adapts. Humans are astonishingly resilient, even in circumstances that seem unbearable. Perhaps they learn which houses still contain useful supplies. Perhaps they establish new routines. Perhaps they find comfort in simple tasks, gathering firewood, planting vegetables, repairing roofs. History often celebrates dramatic heroics, but quiet endurance deserves admiration too. Simply continuing, day after day, without applause, without recognition, without certainty. That may be one of the most difficult achievements of all. And as we slowly leave our imagined survivor for tonight, there's something oddly moving about their story. Not because they changed history, not because they became famous, but because they represent countless ordinary people whose experiences were never written down. People who lived through extraordinary circumstances. People who endured loss on a scale difficult to imagine. People who woke each morning and carried on anyway. The village may eventually recover. New settlers may arrive. Children may once again play in the streets. Church bells may ring again. Life has a stubborn habit of returning. But for a brief moment in time, there was only one person left. One final witness, standing among empty houses, listening to the wind, remembering a community that had vanished. And somewhere in the darkness of history, their footsteps faded into silence, as so many footsteps do. And with that gentle image in mind, we can continue drifting onward into the long, strange history of plague, survival, and the ordinary people who found themselves living through extraordinary times. Part 2. What happened to royal mistresses when kings lost interest? As the village fades gently into the distance, and the church bell falls silent once more, let's drift somewhere rather different. A place with more velvet, more gold, more expensive mistakes. Tonight, we wander into royal courts, those glittering centers of power where kings ruled nations. Nobles schemed endlessly, and fortunes could rise or collapse with astonishing speed. And at the center of many of these courts stood a curious figure, the royal mistress. Not quite a queen, not quite a servant, not quite safe, and certainly not secure, because being the favorite companion of a king could bring immense wealth, luxury, and influence, until, quite suddenly, it didn't. History is full of royal mistresses who enjoyed years of privilege. Some accumulated fortunes, some influenced government policy, some received grand estates, some became among the most powerful women in entire kingdoms. But royal affection was rarely permanent. Kings grew bored. Kings died. Kings married. Kings found someone younger. Or occasionally, kings simply woke up one morning and decided they preferred someone else. Because of course they did. Royal courts were not famous for emotional stability. Imagine living every day knowing your future depended almost entirely upon one man's attention span. And not just any man, a king, a position historically associated with impulsive decisions and surprisingly fragile egos. One of the most famous examples comes from the court of the English king, Charles II. Charles was many things: charming, intelligent, amusing, and remarkably enthusiastic about having mistresses. Historians sometimes joke that keeping track of them requires organizational skills normally reserved for military campaigns. His court overflowed with favorites, women who received gifts, titles, estates, and influence. For a while, life could seem wonderful. Imagine moving from relative obscurity into royal luxury. Fine clothing, servants, comfortable apartments, access to power. People suddenly treating your opinions as important. Not necessarily because your ideas were brilliant, though sometimes they were, but because the king happened to enjoy your company. Court life could feel like a fairy tale, at least temporarily. The difficulty was that fairy tales usually end with happily ever after. Royal courts rarely did. A mistress might spend years enjoying royal favor. Then another woman arrived, perhaps younger, perhaps more fashionable, perhaps simply new. Novelty has always possessed a certain appeal, especially among powerful people accustomed to getting whatever they wanted. And so attention shifted. Slowly, then quickly, the woman who once occupied the center of court life suddenly found herself standing closer to the edges. It was rather like watching a star gradually disappear from the night sky, except the consequences involved property, wealth, political influence, and social status, which made the experience somewhat less poetic. Many former mistresses were fortunate enough to receive pensions. Kings occasionally understood that abandoning former favorites entirely could create unpleasant complications. An unhappy former mistress often possessed sensitive information, sometimes extremely sensitive information. Royal secrets have a habit of becoming public when people feel mistreated. So payments continued, estates remained, titles were preserved, at least in the best circumstances. Some women retired comfortably, living out their remaining years in relative peace. Others married wealthy nobles, a sensible strategy if available, though finding a husband, after spending years as a king's mistress, could sometimes prove complicated. Medieval and early modern societies were often surprisingly forgiving. toward powerful men. Women, meanwhile, encountered somewhat different standards. A shocking development, absolutely nobody familiar with history will find surprising. Still, practical considerations often outweighed moral concerns. A woman connected to the king remained a valuable social asset. Many found respectable marriages despite previous scandals. Others were less fortunate. Consider the case of Nell Gwyn. Nell rose from remarkably humble beginnings. She worked as an actress, a profession that many respectable people viewed with deep suspicion. Yet through wit, charm, and intelligence, she became one of Charles II's most beloved companions. Unlike many court figures, Nell developed a reputation for humor and relatability. People liked her, which was not always common at court. When Charles died in 1685, Nell faced uncertainty. The king's protection vanished overnight. Fortunately, he reportedly ensured she would receive financial support, though collecting promise payments proved more difficult than receiving promises. A recurring theme throughout history. Many rulers excelled at making commitments. Fulfilling them sometimes received less enthusiasm. For some mistresses, the king's death represented the greatest danger of all. A living king could protect favorites. A dead king could do nothing. Political enemies often moved quickly. New rulers arrived. New priorities emerged. Former favorites suddenly became inconvenient reminders of the previous regime. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that everyone who once praised you now avoids eye contact. That doors previously opened for you now remain closed. That invitations stop arriving. Court society could be extraordinarily ruthless. Affection was temporary. Status was fragile. Memory was selective. Let's drift across the English Channel into France. There we encounter one of history's most influential royal mistresses, Madame de Pompadour. Jean Antoinette Poisson, later known as Madame de Pompadour, became the official mistress of King Louis XV. Official, which sounds unusual because it was. French courts occasionally approached royal affairs with remarkable openness. Everyone knew. Nobody pretended otherwise. Pompadour wielded enormous influence. She sponsored artists, supported architects, helped shape cultural life across France. She became far more than a romantic companion. She evolved into a political figure. Yet, even her position required careful navigation. Royal favor could fade. Court factions constantly competed for influence. Enemies waited patiently. The remarkable thing about Pompadour was her adaptability. When her romantic relationship with Louis cooled, she managed to retain friendship and influence, an extraordinarily difficult achievement. Most royal favorites vanished once affection disappeared. Pompadour remained, not because of beauty alone, not because of luck, but because she understood politics. She made herself useful, a skill that has preserved many careers throughout history. Royal courts, governments, and offices operate on surprisingly similar principles in that regard. Of course, not every mistress possessed such advantages. Many lacked political allies. Many lacked independent wealth. Many lacked opportunities to reinvent themselves. And for these women, life after royal favor could become painfully uncertain. There is something strangely melancholy about reading their stories. One year they appear constantly in official records. Letters mention them. Diplomats discuss them. Artists paint their portraits. They seem important. Then the references stop, almost entirely. History moves on. A new favorite arrives. The old favorite fades away. Like actors leaving a stage after the audience has shifted attention elsewhere. Yet behind those disappearing records existed real lives, real anxieties, real futures. Imagine spending years at court surrounded by luxury, then suddenly finding yourself living quietly in the countryside. No banquets, no ceremonies, no royal attention, only ordinary days. Some women welcome the change. Court life could be exhausting. Intrigue never slept. Gossip traveled faster than horses. Every conversation contained hidden meanings. Every friendship carried risks. Retirement may have felt like relief. Others struggled deeply. Humans adapt quickly to privilege, perhaps a little too quickly. A palace becomes normal surprisingly fast. Losing that environment can feel like losing an entire identity. As centuries passed, the specific details changed, but the basic pattern remained remarkably consistent. Royal affection created opportunity. Royal disinterest created danger. Some women navigated the transition successfully. Some disappeared into obscurity. Some retained wealth. Some lost everything. And perhaps that uncertainty explains why the position of royal mistress was both enviable and precarious. From a distance, the role looked glamorous. Silk dresses, jewels, grand apartments, influence, luxury. Yet beneath the surface lay constant instability. Every gift depended upon favor. Every privilege depended upon access. Every future depended upon circumstances. Some vanished quietly from history's pages, but all shared one reality. Royal attention, no matter how dazzling, was rarely permanent. Kings changed their minds. Kings grew older. Kings died. And eventually, every favorite faced the same question. What happens when the king stops looking your way? For some, the answer was comfort. For others, uncertainty. And for many, it was a slow return to ordinary life. A life beyond the palace walls. A life where titles mattered less. Where gossip traveled shorter distances. And where, for the first time in many years, nobody expected them to be the center of a king's world. As the palace grows quiet and the candles burn lower, we can continue drifting onward through history. Because royal courts, as it turns out, produced no shortage of strange lives, unfortunate decisions, and remarkably fragile fortunes. Part 3: The History of Ancient Greece. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Tonight, we're continuing our slow journey through the ancient world. The moon hangs quietly above the Aegean Sea. Gentle waves roll against rocky shores. Far away, an owl calls into the darkness. And somewhere among rugged hills and olive groves, the people of ancient Greece are settling in for the night. By now, many centuries have passed since the first great civilizations appeared around the Mediterranean. Empires have risen, kingdoms have fallen, entire cities have vanished beneath dust and memory. Yet the Greek world continues to grow, not as a single nation, not as one united kingdom, but as hundreds of independent city-states, each with its own government, its own traditions, its own rivalries, and naturally, its own opinions about why everyone else was doing everything wrong. The Greeks were exceptionally talented at disagreeing with one another, sometimes peacefully, often not. One of the most famous city-states was Athens. Today, Athens is remembered as the birthplace of democracy, although the version practiced by the Athenians looked rather different from modern democracies. Only certain citizens could vote. Women could not participate. Neither could slaves, nor many foreign residents. Still, for its time, the idea was remarkable. Instead of one king making decisions, thousands of citizens gathered to debate public issues. Imagine attending one of these assemblies. The sun shines overhead. Hundreds or even thousands of men crowd together. Some speak passionately. Others complain. Many argue. A few probably wish they had stayed home. In other words, democracy was already functioning exactly as expected. Athens became wealthy through trade. Its harbor welcomed ships from across the Mediterranean. Merchants arrived carrying grain, wine, olive oil, timber, metals, luxury goods. The city buzzed with activity. Markets filled with voices speaking different languages. Philosophers wandered through public spaces discussing difficult questions. Artisans worked in busy workshops. Politicians debated endlessly. Life was noisy, busy, and occasionally chaotic. Meanwhile, another city-state developed a very different reputation. Sparta. Few places in history have inspired more fascination than Sparta. The Spartans organized much of society around military service, strength, discipline, obedience. From an early age, Spartan boys entered a rigorous training system designed to create soldiers. The reality was often harsher and less glamorous than later legends suggest. Training involved hardship, competition, strict discipline, and very little sympathy for complaints. A difficult environment for anyone hoping to enjoy a relaxed childhood. Still, Sparta became famous throughout Greece. Its warriors earned respect and fear. Its society appeared mysterious to outsiders. Athenians often viewed Spartans as excessively severe. Spartans frequently viewed Athenians as overly talkative. Both groups had a point. For a while, Athens and Sparta cooperated, especially when a powerful threat emerged from the east. The Persian Empire. At its height, the Persian Empire was enormous, stretching across vast territories, containing many peoples, languages, cultures, and rulers in Greece began worrying about Persian expansion. Tensions grew. Eventually, conflict became unavoidable. The Persian Wars began. One of the most famous events occurred at the Battle of Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass, a small Greek force, a much larger Persian army. The story later became legendary. Over time, many details grew larger than life. History often enjoys embellishment. Yet, even stripped of myth, the courage shown there remains impressive. The defenders knew their chances were slim. Still, they fought, not because victory seemed likely, but because delaying the enemy mattered. Farther south, Athens prepared for danger. Citizens evacuated. Families fled. The city itself faced destruction. Imagine leaving your home uncertain whether it would still exist when you returned. The uncertainty alone would be terrifying. The Persians eventually entered Athens. Buildings burned. Smoke rose into the sky. Yet the war was not over. The Athenians possessed something valuable, a powerful navy. Greek ships confronted Persian forces at the Battle of Salamis. There, narrow waters limited Persian advantages. Greek commanders used local knowledge and strategy effectively. The result changed history. Persian expansion into Greece slowed dramatically, and Athens emerged stronger than before. After the wars, Athens entered what historians often call its golden age. This was the age of great building projects, great art, great philosophy, and, naturally, great political arguments. Because Athenians would hardly have recognized themselves without constant debate, the magnificent Parthenon rose above the city, dedicated to the goddess Athena. Its white marble gleamed in sunlight. Even today, its ruins remain among the most recognizable structures in human history. Parthenon still stands as a reminder of that remarkable era. Philosophers flourished. One of the most famous was Socrates. Socrates spent much of his time asking questions. Endless questions. Questions about justice, knowledge, virtue, truth. This sounds admirable, and often it was, though one suspects some. Athenians occasionally crossed the street to avoid another lengthy conversation. His student, Plato, preserved many of these discussions. Later, Plato taught another remarkable thinker, Aristotle. Together, these philosophers shaped ideas that continue influencing the world today. Questions they debated more than 2,000 years ago still appear in classrooms and books. Not a bad legacy for people who spent considerable time arguing beneath the Mediterranean sun. Yet prosperity rarely lasts forever. Athens grew powerful, too powerful, according to some of its neighbors. Sparta became increasingly concerned. Suspicion spread, alliances shifted, fear intensified. Eventually, Greece's two greatest city-states found themselves heading toward conflict. The Peloponnesian War began, and it lasted for decades. Wars often begin with confidence. Each side expects success. Each side imagines a quick victory. Reality frequently proves less cooperative. The conflict exhausted both Athens and Sparta. Resources vanished. Lives were lost. Entire regions suffered. At one point, plague struck Athens itself. Crowded conditions accelerated the disaster. People died in large numbers. Fear spread through the city. Even the famous leader Pericles became one of its victims. The plague weakened Athens severely. Yet the war continued, year after year, campaign after campaign, until eventually Sparta emerged victorious. But victory carried its own problems. Years of warfare had damaged the entire Greek world. No city-state remained untouched. And as the Greeks recovered from one struggle, a new power slowly rose to the north. A kingdom called Macedon. Its ruler, Philip II, transformed Macedon into a formidable military force. Greek city-states often underestimated him, a mistake that would become increasingly difficult to correct. Philip expanded his influence steadily, methodically, patiently, and after his death, his son inherited something extraordinary: a powerful army, an ambitious kingdom, and opportunities stretching far beyond Greece. That son's name was Alexander. And as we continue drifting through the night, our journey is about to leave Greece itself behind. Because the story of ancient Greece is about to become the story of a young king whose ambitions would carry Greek culture across continents. But that is a tale for the next stretch of our long and sleepy voyage through history. For now, the stars shine quietly above Athens. The harbor grows calm. The philosophers finish their debates. And the ancient world waits patiently for dawn. Part 4. What did ancient Roman night watchmen actually do all night? As the last voices of Athens fade into the distance, and the marble temples grow quiet beneath the stars, let's drift westward across the Mediterranean. The sea is calm tonight. A few merchant ships rock gently in dark harbors. Moonlight shimmers across the water, and far ahead, illuminated by countless oil lamps, stands the largest city most people on Earth had ever seen. Rome, a city of perhaps 1 million people at its height, a place so vast, crowded, noisy, and complicated that keeping order during daylight was already a challenge. Keeping order after sunset was something else entirely. Because once darkness settled over ancient Rome, the city transformed. The busy streets emptied. Market stalls closed. Government officials returned home. The wealthy retreated behind thick walls. And ordinary Romans hurried indoors. Not because they particularly enjoyed early bedtimes, but because nighttime could be dangerous. Very dangerous. Which brings us to tonight's subject: the men responsible for watching over Rome while everyone else slept. The Roman Night Watch, known as the Vigiles, part firefighters, part police officers, part security guards, part emergency responders, and occasionally unwilling participants in situations they almost certainly wished to avoid. Because Rome at night was not a peaceful place, at least not by modern standards. Imagine standing in the middle of a Roman street after sunset. There are no electric lights, no street lamps stretching into the distance, no glowing windows from television screens, no headlights, no neon signs, only darkness, perhaps a few lanterns, perhaps moonlight, perhaps the faint glow of household fires. The rest is shadow. The city becomes unfamiliar, even dangerous. People walking through narrow streets might easily stumble. Thieves could hide in dark corners. Arguments could escalate unnoticed. And worst of all, fires could break out. Now, modern cities deal with fire using professional fire departments, pressurized water systems, alarms, and emergency communications. Ancient Rome had none of these luxuries. A fire could spread terrifyingly fast. Many buildings contained wooden beams. Many homes stood closely packed together. Open flames were common. Cooking fires burned constantly. Oil lamps illuminated rooms. Accidents happened frequently, and once a fire started, stopping it was often incredibly difficult. Naturally, this worried Roman authorities. Nobody wants their capital city accidentally turning into a giant bonfire. So the Romans created the Vigiles, thousands of men assigned to patrol the city during the night. The organization was established by Augustus around the beginning of the 1st century AD. Augustus spent much of his reign trying to make Rome more orderly, a sensible goal, though organizing 1 million Romans was probably similar to organizing several thousand cats. The vigiles were divided into units stationed throughout the city. Each night they began their patrols, walking the streets, inspecting neighborhoods, watching for trouble, and hoping nothing caught fire. Unfortunately for them, things often did. Imagine beginning your shift just after sunset. You gather your equipment: lanterns, buckets, hooks, axes, basic tools useful during emergencies. Then you head into the darkness. The streets feel different at night, quieter, but not silent. You hear footsteps echoing through alleyways, dogs barking in the distance, drunken singing from taverns, the occasional argument, perhaps someone dropping something heavy. Cities never truly sleep, even ancient ones. As the hours pass, watchmen patrol assigned routes. They check for suspicious activity, monitor buildings, look for signs of smoke, remain alert, at least in theory. In practice, some probably grew bored. Human nature has remained remarkably consistent over the centuries. Some watchmen undoubtedly performed their duties diligently. Others probably spent portions of the night wishing they were home in bed. One can hardly blame them. Night shifts have never been universally beloved. Still, the work mattered, particularly when fires appeared. And fires appeared often. Suppose smoke emerges from an apartment building. A resident notices flames. Someone begins shouting. Suddenly, the quiet street erupts into chaos. People rush outside. Children cry. Neighbors gather. Panic spreads. The vigilas spring into action, or at least as much action as sleepy Romans carrying buckets could reasonably manage. Water becomes the first priority. Teams form chains. Buckets move from hand to hand, back and forth, again and again. A physically exhausting process, and not always effective. Sometimes Roman firefighters relied on a different strategy. Instead of extinguishing flames directly, they attempted to stop their spread. Buildings might be demolished, walls torn down, structures sacrificed. A harsh solution, yet often necessary. A destroyed building was unfortunate. An entire district burning down was considerably worse. The famous Great Fire of Rome in AD 64 demonstrated exactly how vulnerable the city remained. For days, flames swept through large sections of Rome. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Thousands lost homes. Rumors flourished. Accusations spread. And the Emperor Nero became forever associated with the disaster. Although many stories told about Nero are probably exaggerated, ancient historians occasionally enjoyed dramatic storytelling. Still, the fire revealed a simple truth. Even with organized watchmen, Rome remained vulnerable, which meant the vigilas never lacked work. But firefighting was only part of their responsibilities. They also acted as law enforcement, a somewhat challenging assignment, especially after midnight. Imagine encountering a group of drunken citizens arguing loudly outside a tavern. This was hardly uncommon. Wine flowed generously throughout Roman society, and alcohol has always possessed a remarkable ability to convince people that shouting is an excellent solution to disagreements. The vigilas often intervened, breaking up disturbances, questioning suspicious individuals, maintaining order. Not glamorous work, but necessary. The night watch also pursued thieves, and Rome certainly had thieves. A city containing wealth, crowds, and darkness tends to attract them. Pickpockets operated in busy areas. Burglars targeted homes. Criminals searched for opportunities. The vigilas attempted to discourage such activities through visible patrols. Much like modern police officers, the logic was straightforward. Criminals generally prefer not being caught. Visible authority figures complicate their plans, though not always successfully. One interesting aspect of Roman night patrols was their relationship with ordinary citizens. Not everyone welcomed being questioned by armed officials. Some residents viewed watchmen with suspicion, others appreciated their presence. Most probably fell somewhere in between. Grateful when protection was needed, annoyed when inconvenienced. Another timeless human behavior. As midnight passes, Rome grows quieter. The wealthy sleep behind secure walls. Senators rest in comfortable villas. Merchants dream of profitable deals. Laborers recover from long days. Meanwhile, the vigiles continue walking, street after street, hour after hour. The city belongs to them now. In a sense, they see a version of Rome few others experience. The hidden Rome, the sleeping Rome, the Rome of shadows and silence. They witness bakery workers beginning preparations before dawn, dock workers arriving early, travelers entering the city gates, street cleaners removing debris. The first hints of morning activity. Night gradually gives way to dawn, and with dawn comes relief. Because if the city survives another night without major disaster, the Watchmen have succeeded. Not a dramatic success. No triumphal parade awaits them. No statues will be erected. No poets will celebrate their achievements. The reward is simply that everything remains standing. Sometimes the most important jobs are the least celebrated. History often focuses on emperors, generals, conquerors. Yet enormous cities depend upon ordinary workers performing routine tasks, people whose names rarely appear in books. The vigiles belong to that category. Most Romans never became famous. Most watchmen never commanded armies. Most lived ordinary lives. Yet every night they helped keep one of history's greatest cities functioning. And that deserves recognition. As dawn finally breaks over Rome, sunlight begins touching rooftops. Shops prepare to open. Citizens emerge from homes. The city slowly awakens. Another day begins. For most residents, the transition feels effortless. They slept peacefully. The city remains intact. Life continues. Few pause to consider the men who spent the night patrolling dark streets, watching for smoke, stopping fights, chasing thieves, carrying buckets, and doing their best to prevent catastrophe before breakfast. Yet for centuries, that was their reality. Night after night, year after year, while Rome slept, the vigiles walked. And as the first rays of sunlight spread across the ancient city, we can quietly leave them to their rest. Because our journey through history is far from over. There are still emperors to meet, kingdoms to explore, and countless strange lives waiting in the shadows of the past. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's continue drifting onward through the long, sleepy story of history.